Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am sharing a couple of cards featuring a technique that I'm calling Selective Ink Blending. And these cards feature some brand new products from Pinkfresh Studio. They're new for February 2022, and I will be sharing more cards featuring this technique tomorrow, so be sure to stay tuned. Now, I wanted to give you a look at this brand new release from Pinkfresh Studio. I'm just going to hold each one of these up to the camera really quick. If you want more information or links, check the YouTube description below or head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. I will have that linked below as well. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, a complete list of supplies, as well as some information on a blog hop celebrating this brand new release. Now, this release has some cling stamps, it has some clear stamps, it has some pop-out stamps, it has some hot foil plates, and it has this delicate floral print cling stamp that I'm going to be using today. Now, I did want to show you this Chrysanthemum Slimline stamp. I have actually cut my stamp set so that it can fit in one of these larger stamp storage pouches. So it does come as a slimline kind of format, but I've cut that down. Now, I'll be using this delicate floral print cling stamp. This is a rubber cling stamp, and I'm going to be stamping it using my Misty stamping tool. So I've gone ahead and removed the mouse pad or the foam piece that is in my Misty stamping tool, and I'm mounting this to the lid of my Misty. Now, I'm also using the brand new Misty sticky mats. Now, this is a sticky mat, and you can see it comes in a pack of 3. They all have different size grids on them, but they are all sticky. This fits perfectly inside of your Misty, and it is a sticky surface. So I'm going to use this to hold my A2 size card panel in place. Now, in order to hold the sticky mat inside of my Misty, I'm going to go ahead and just use my Misty magnets to hold it in place. And you're going to see me place my A2 size card front directly over the cling stamp and then close the Misty upside down on top of it. And what's going to happen is that sticky mat is going to grab my cardstock and hold it in place. And that way I can get edge to edge stamping on this A2 size piece of cardstock without any magnets or anything getting in the way. Now, I'm going to ink up this stamp using the Pinkfresh Studio Hybrid ink. This is a great black ink, and I'm going to ink it up really well, and then I'm going to close the door of my Misty, and I'm going to use my Debbie tool here to add pressure all over the surface of this stamp. Now, the lines on this stamp are really delicate, which is why it's named Delicate Floral Print or Pattern. And so I don't want to squish those lines down. I want to just add a nice even amount of pressure, kind of light to medium pressure. And then in order to deepen and darken the black color, I'm going to re-ink and stamp again. And that's going to give me a nice crisp black image. Now, I did this a few times and created a few panels featuring this beautiful print. I love it. It is so graphic, and I think it's beautiful on its own, but I'm going to do some selective ink blending on it today. But before I do that, I want to make sure this hybrid ink is nice and dry so that it doesn't smear and smudge when I go and blend my ink over the top. So now it's time for some selective ink blending, and I have the coordinating layering stencil set that's available for purchase separately with this delicate floral stamp. And I am going to take this large open area of the florals and I'm going to ink that. Now, I am only using a few of the stencils today, so I'm only going to be coloring the flowers and not the leaves. But this stencil set does come with stencils that color the leaves as well. But because I wanted to keep this more of a graphic, bold, black and white kind of pattern, I only wanted to add color to the flowers. And so I'm just using a few of the stencils today to selectively ink blend some of the pattern and not all of the pattern. So I started out with a base color of the Candy Violet from Pinkfresh Studio. And I'm wiping up my stencil and leaving that same stencil in place, and I'm going to bring in some bubblegum ink. Now, one of my favorite colors, and I don't know exactly what the color is called. I see it, I have it in my house, but I don't know what to name it. but it's like an orchid color purple. It's somewhere between pink and purple. Some people call it fuchsia. Some people call it magenta. Some people call it orchid. I don't know. I just know I like it. And so I'm trying to recreate that color by blending two different colors of Pinkfresh Studio inks together. So I left that larger floral pattern in place and I blended a little bit of the bubblegum just into the center portion of the flowers. And now I'm taking the detail layer of the floral and blending over with the Raspberry Bliss. Now that detail layer felt a little harsh to me, so I put the first stencil back in place and kind of softened it with the bubblegum ink again. And you can see the beautiful selective ink blending that I have. By using fewer of the stencils, I've just added color to the florals and not to the leaves. This gives it a completely different look than if you were to add color to the leaves as well. Now I decided to add a little bit of shadow to this print using a Copic marker. So I'm just using a toner gray marker in a T1 and a T3, I believe, to add shadows along the edges of these florals. Now, another way that you can do some selective ink blending, and I'm going to combine this with the previous technique that I just showed you, is to do a little bit of masking. Now, I am masking off a diagonal line on this panel, but you could also mask off a circle or a heart or a square and only add ink to a certain portion of this panel as well. Now I'm going to ink everything above this diagonal line, and below the line, I'm going to leave it just a black and white pattern. And I'm going to use this panel in a card project that kind of features an on the diagonal design. So I'm using the exact same colors that I used before, and I am limiting the stencils that I'm using just to the ones that color the florals. Again, I'm using the Candy Violet color, the Bubblegum color, and the Raspberry Bliss. Now you'll notice that as I add color to just a portion of this first stencil, this is stencil number 1, it creates that large base of the flower. I switched over to a smaller blending brush, so I had a little more control over where I was applying that bubblegum ink. Now I wanted to add a little bit of gold splatter to these panels. And so I have a spray bottle with water in it. I keep a few of these in my drawer with different things that I use in my craft room. And I will be sure to link these bottles below because they're super cute and they spray really well. So I've sprayed a little bit of water into this gold watercolor pan here. This is from Kuretake Gansai Tombi. It's from their Starry Colors palette. It's a metallic gold watercolor palette. And I'm just gonna kind of swirl my brush in this watercolor until I get it to the consistency that I want. And then I'm going to use my brush to just flick on some gold splatters. Now, I made a mess. But luckily, my Glassboard Studio mat here cleaned up really well, and I added splatters to several of these panels. Now I am using the brand new Chrysanthemum Slimline stamp set. I am not using the beautiful flower that is in this set, but I'm just using the sentiment that says, "You got this." And I'm stamping it in some VersaFine Claire Nocturne pigment ink onto some white cardstock. And then I'm going to use the coordinating die, which is what I love about these sentiments. The other one says like "never stop" or something. I love that there are coordinating dies for these big, bold sentiments. So I have taped the coordinating die in place using some removable tape and run that through my die cut machine. And now I'm popping this out of the die and I have this really cool, beautiful sentiment here. Now I do want to mention that that stamp set, the Chrysanthemum Slimline, also has coordinating stencils available, and that big, beautiful floral, I cannot wait to play with it. Now I use the coordinating die to die cut this sentiment several times from some orchid cardstock, I think 3 times, and I'm going to layer them up to add a little bit of shadow and a little bit of dimension. Now I do want to mention, this is not a shadow layer. I'm just going to offset it on the stamped layer to create a little bit of an orchid colored shadow layer to this sentiment. And I think it builds up dimension and it adds that color behind it, and it turns out so beautifully. I love the way that this looks with that bold, crisp, black and white image over the top of it. So once I have the orchid layers kind of stacked up there, I'm going to stack this stamped layer right on top, and you're going to see me offset it just a little bit, and you'll see the orchid cardstock peeking out from behind it. And this cardstock is orchid from the stamp market, and so maybe the color that I created with the ink blending and mixing the two colors, maybe that's called orchid. I don't know. This seemed like the closest match, but I've always had a hard time naming that color. So maybe let me know in the comments below what you would call that color. Now I have a sub-sentiment here. It says, "You were made to be awesome," or "born to be awesome." I am going to white heat emboss that on some black cardstock. I used my rabbit hole cottontail embossing powder tool to prep the surface of my cardstock, and then I stamped it in some Versamark ink. And now I'm adding some white embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set that and trim it down into a sentiment strip for the front of my card. Now, this left a lot of powder on the surface of this black cardstock, but that's okay. I am going to use a microfiber cloth just to wipe over the surface of the cardstock once that embossing powder has cooled, and it removes the excess powder from the surface of the cardstock. Now, in order to trim this down, I'm going to use my Tim Holtz mini guillotine trimmer. I love this thing. It is so small and perfect for cutting just tiny little sentiment strips and that sort of thing. I do have a piece of white cardstock in place on the platform of the trimmer, so I can see exactly where my blade is going to hit on this black cardstock and make sure that I'm cutting it right where I want it. So you can use a contrasting piece of cardstock on the base of the trimmer or the platform of the trimmer to help you see where you're going to cut your sentiment strip. And I, of course, learned that from Jennifer McGuire. So now I have the Geotile Die. Now this is available in a die as well as a stencil set and a hot foil plate from Pinkfresh Studio. I am die cutting this from some heavyweight white cardstock. And I'm just beating it on the surface of my work surface here to get all of the extra pieces out. And I'm going to layer this up. I'm going to use some cactus cardstock from the stamp market and 3 layers of this heavyweight white cardstock to create some dimension with this really delicate die. Now, I absolutely love this. This is giving me like all the Florida vibes. I don't know why I feel like it's so Florida with the colors and the like that geometric look. I don't know. My daughter, I think, said it gave her Zen garden vibes. So maybe that's the thing I'm looking for there. And I used some spray adhesive to stack up these layers. Now, I don't love to use spray adhesive, but doing all of this layering with this intricate of a die on that large of a scale, I felt like this was the way to go. And I've tried like the spritzer bottle of the E6000 spray adhesive. I don't love that, but this Elmer's spray adhesive seems to work pretty good. And so I've just put a scrap piece of paper in the bottom of this box, sprayed my die cuts, and now I'm stacking them up. I sprayed the back side of the die cuts, and then I'm going to press them into place, and I put my Misty stamping tool over the top of this along with my die cut machine to kind of press all those layers together and hold them in place. So now that I have all of those layers put together, I am going to take this panel and I'm going to trim it down so that it will fit behind that layered up die cut that I created. And I just needed to take a little bit off of this die or this panel here. And then I'm going to take that layered up die cut and I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to spray some more spray adhesive on the back, and I'm going to layer this right over that stamped and ink blended panel. So I'm just going to place that right over so you can see that really cool graphic floral print coming through this die cut. And I absolutely love the way this turned out. Now, this has a lot going on, so it may not be for everyone, but I thought it was a really cool and different effect that you could get. And I like that I didn't add the green to the leaves, because then you have that really cool graphic black and white effect on the background, and you get the green from the layered die cut over the top. Now I have this foiled sentiment. This is from the Fancy Script Hot Foil set from Pinkfresh Studio. And I've just layered that up to add some dimension. I put the Curvy Leaves die cut behind it. I die cut that from some vellum. And I used another Pinkfresh stamp set to create that heat embossed sub-sentiment below it. So that's my first card featuring Selective Ink Blending. Now, do you remember this panel that we created earlier with that diagonal line kind of masked across that? I am going to add a piece of gold cardstock right along that diagonal line, and I'm going to pop up this sentiment using a little bit of foam adhesive, this You Got This sentiment. I love the way this looks. And I'm adding that heat embossed sentiment strip right below it. I'm going to layer this up on more of that cactus cardstock from the Stamp Market, so I have just a really thin border around it. And then I'm adding a panel of foam adhesive behind this entire card front, and I'm going to adhere that to an A2 top folding card base. So I created that by cutting my cardstock to 4 1/4 by 11 inches and then scoring it at 5.5 inches. Now I finished off both of these cards by adding some embellishments. I used the Pinkfresh Studio metallic gold pearls and I placed them using a little bit of Barely Arts glue. And that finishes off my second card for today, featuring this really fun selective ink blending technique. So here's a look at both of the cards that I created. I love the graphic, bold kind of nature of these cards. They are so much fun. They feel very like interior design inspired to me, and I absolutely love that because I love to get inspiration from other areas as well. Now, as always, I will have links to the featured products used in these projects in the description at YouTube. So if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there and head on over to my blog, as I mentioned before, over at sprinkledwithglitter.com. I'll have that linked below. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, a complete list of supplies, as well as some information on a blog hop celebrating this brand new release from Pinkfresh Studio. Now, as always, I want to thank you for stopping by and hanging out with me today. I want to remind you that I'm going to have a couple more cards featuring this selective ink blending technique tomorrow here on my YouTube channel, so don't miss out on that. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you were inspired. If you were, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here on my YouTube channel so you don't miss any of my paper crafting and card making video tutorials. And if you loved this video, I would love it if you would share it with a friend. Thanks again for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. If you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, go ahead and click the button on the left side of the screen. And here's a couple more video tutorials I thought you might enjoy.